They say every love story starts with a spark. That magical moment when two people look into each other's eyes and feel like the universe itself conspired to bring them together. For me, that spark came on an ordinary spring afternoon in the most unexpected way. I was 24, fresh out of college, working my first real job at a local marketing firm. Life felt like it was finally opening up for me. Independence, ambition, and the excitement of living on my own. But with all that came loneliness too. After long hours of sitting behind a desk, coming home to an empty apartment felt heavy. That was the stage of life I was in when I met Daniel. I still remember the first time I saw him. It wasn't at a bar or some romantic place. It was at the grocery store, of all places. I had a cart full of vegetables and a half-priced frozen pizza I'd convinced myself I deserved after a stressful week. I was staring at the shelf, deciding between two brands of pasta sauce, when a deep, confident voice said, "That one's better. It's less salty." I turned my head, slightly annoyed that a stranger thought I needed advice on spaghetti sauce, and that's when I saw him. Tall, with broad shoulders, hazel eyes, and that easy kind of smile that makes you feel like you've known the person forever. Normally, I'm not the type to engage in small talk with random men, but something about the way he spoke, gentle, almost playful, made me pause. "Oh, really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "And what makes you the expert?" He chuckled. "Because I'm Italian, and if there's one thing we take seriously, it's pasta." That was the first time I laughed in a grocery store aisle. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like longer. By the time I got home, there was a strange flutter in my chest. A stranger had just walked into my ordinary Friday and made it feel extraordinary. A week later, he asked me out for coffee. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a weekend trip. And before I knew it, Daniel was no longer just a stranger with pasta advice. He was the man who had taken over my heart. Looking back now, I realize how perfectly he played his role in my life. He wasn't just charming. He was thoughtful in ways that disarmed me. When I mentioned I liked sunflowers, he showed up at my door with a small bouquet. Not roses, not lilies, but sunflowers, bright and cheerful, just like he said I deserved. When I was too stressed about work deadlines, he cooked dinner in my tiny kitchen and made me laugh until I forgot I even had a boss breathing down my neck. He was everything I thought a partner should be. Supportive, funny, responsible, and above all, he made me feel safe. My friends adored him. My mother said, "Honey, I can see the way he looks at you. That man is going to take care of you for the rest of your life." And I believed her. I don't know how else to describe the early days of our relationship except by saying it felt like a fairy tale. You know those movies where the couple runs through a field hand in hand as if nothing bad could ever touch them? That was us. At least, that's how I saw it. And here's the dangerous part. When you believe you found your forever, you stop paying attention to the little cracks that form along the way. But back then, all I saw was perfection. After 2 years of dating, Daniel proposed. It was winter, the city wrapped in Christmas lights, and we were ice skating downtown. I was wobbling clumsily on the ice when he suddenly knelt down. Yes, right there on the rink, and pulled a small velvet box out of his coat. People gasped. Strangers stopped skating. Someone even clapped. "Marry me," he said, his breath visible in the cold air, his eyes locked on mine. And without hesitation, I said yes. Our wedding was beautiful, simple but elegant. I wore a lace dress that hugged my body just right, and Daniel looked like he had stepped out of a magazine in his black tuxedo. We didn't have the biggest venue or the fanciest flowers, but when I walked down the aisle and saw him waiting for me, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the promise we were making. To stand by each other through everything, to love and protect, to never betray. I said those vows with tears in my eyes. My whole heart poured into every word. If only I knew what those promises would come to mean later. The first years of marriage were golden, or at least that's how I remember them now. We bought a small house in the suburbs with white shutters and a porch where I planted flowers. Daniel worked in real estate, and he was good at it. So good that money was never really a problem. I left my job after a year of marriage. At the time, it felt like the right choice. Daniel encouraged it, saying, "You don't need to stress yourself with work. Focus on building our home. I'll take care of us." And so I did. I became the wife who cooked homemade meals, who kept the house spotless, who supported him in every way. I poured myself into our marriage, into the life we were building together. But here's the lesson I didn't know back then. The moment you hand over all your independence to someone else, you're no longer equal. You're dependent. And dependency, my friends, is dangerous. At the time, though, I didn't see it. All I saw was love. All I felt was pride when people said, "Daniel is such a good husband. You're lucky." And yes, I thought I was lucky. There's something almost intoxicating about the way love blinds you in the beginning. You create this image in your head that your life is different, that your partner is different, that somehow you've been chosen for a storybook ending. I clung to that belief. I clung to Daniel. I clung to us. And I had no idea that while I was busy holding on, he was slowly letting go. That was the beginning of my story. The perfect beginning. The kind of beginning that fools you into thinking the middle will be just as sweet and the ending just as beautiful. But life, as I would later learn, doesn't always honor the promises we make at the altar. Sometimes it tears them apart in ways you could never imagine. And sometimes, the man you thought was your forever becomes the man who teaches you the most painful lesson of your life. They say marriage is about compromise, about giving and taking in equal measure. But in my marriage, the giving seemed to fall mostly on me. At first, I didn't even notice. I left my job willingly. Daniel made it sound so simple, so loving. Why stress yourself with deadlines and long hours when I make enough for both of us? Stay home, enjoy life, take care of yourself. I'll provide. It sounded romantic. What woman doesn't want to hear that her husband will take care of her? After all, isn't that what every fairy tale promises? The prince rescues the princess, builds her a castle, and she never has to worry again. So I gave in. I quit my job. I packed up my office cubicle, said goodbye to my coworkers, and stepped into what I thought was going to be a life of peace and happiness. For the first few months, it really did feel that way. I woke up late, made breakfast for Daniel, tried new recipes I found online, decorated our home, and filled my days with small joys. I convinced myself this was exactly what I wanted. But slowly, something inside me began to shift. See, when you give up your independence, it doesn't happen with a loud crash. It happens quietly, almost silently, like a slow leak you don't notice until the floor is flooded. At first, it was small things. Daniel handled all the finances. He paid the bills, managed the accounts, decided where the money went. I thought it was practical. Why should I worry when he was so good at numbers? But soon I realized I didn't even know how much was in our savings. I didn't know which bank we used for our mortgage. I didn't even have access to the online accounts. I told myself it didn't matter. We're married. What's his is mine. What's mine is his. Right? But what was mine, really? I had no income. No paycheck with my name on it. No career to fall back on if things went wrong. And I didn't see the danger in that yet. Then came the sacrifices that weren't so obvious. I stopped going out with friends as often. Daniel didn't forbid me, of course not. He was too smart for that. Instead, he'd say things like, "You're really going out again? I thought we could have dinner together tonight," or, "Why spend money on fancy dinners when I can cook something better here?" It sounded sweet, almost caring, but slowly, without realizing, I started saying no to my friends more often. My social circle shrank until most of my world revolved around him. Even the way I dressed changed. I used to wear bright colors, bold lipstick, heels that made me feel powerful. But Daniel preferred me in soft sweaters and natural makeup. "You don't need all that," he'd say with a smile. "You're beautiful just the way you are." And again, it sounded sweet. What woman doesn't want her husband to think she's naturally beautiful? But before long, I found myself avoiding the clothes I used to love, reaching instead for the outfits I knew would please him. Little by little, I was disappearing. I wish I could tell you I noticed right away, that I stood up for myself the moment I saw what was happening. But the truth is, I didn't. Because love has a funny way of blinding you. Every sacrifice felt like proof of my devotion. Every compromise felt like an act of love. I thought I was doing what a good wife should do. But here's the thing about sacrifices. When only one person is making them, they stop being sacrifices. They become losses. And I was losing myself piece by piece. The hardest part was giving up my dreams. Before Daniel, I wanted to start my own business. I had ideas, ambition, and the drive to make it happen. But every time I brought it up, he'd say, "Why put yourself under stress? We don't need the extra money. Just enjoy life." And because I thought he knew best, I let the dream fade. I traded my ambition for comfort, my independence for security, my voice for silence. At the time, I didn't realize the cost. But now, looking back, I see it clearly. The more I gave up, the more power Daniel gained. Not because he asked for it directly, but because I handed it to him without question. And yet, I loved him. That's the part that hurts the most when I think about it. I wasn't making these sacrifices out of fear or pressure. I was doing it out of love. Out of a genuine belief that he had my best interests at heart. I believed in him more than I believed in myself. And that right there was my biggest mistake. By the 3rd year of our marriage, my world was small. Too small. Daniel's career was thriving. He was moving up in real estate, making more money than ever, meeting new people, networking, attending events. His life was expanding, full of opportunities. And mine was shrinking. I stayed home most days, cooking, cleaning, waiting for him to come home. I convinced myself it was enough. That love was enough. That marriage was about supporting each other, even if it meant putting my own dreams aside. But deep down, a quiet voice inside me began to whisper, "What about you? What happened to your dreams? When did you stop living for yourself?" I tried to silence that voice. I told myself I was happy. I told myself this was what I wanted. But the truth was, I wasn't happy. Not really. I was comfortable, yes. But comfort is not the same as happiness. Looking back now, I see that chapter 2 of my life, those silent sacrifices, wasn't just about giving up my independence. It was about setting the stage for what was to come. Because when the betrayal finally happened, when I discovered Daniel's secret, I had nothing left to fall back on. No career, no savings, no safety net. And that's exactly what made my revenge so much sweeter later. Because when you've already lost everything, you stop being afraid of losing more. And that's when you become dangerous. Every love story has its honeymoon phase. The part where everything feels magical, where arguments are small and easily forgiven, where you believe nothing could ever break you apart. For us, that phase lasted about 3 years. I remember the exact moment when I first felt the crack, the tiny fracture in the perfect image I had of our marriage. It wasn't a dramatic event. It wasn't him coming home smelling like another woman's perfume or finding a strange text on his phone. No, it was something far more subtle. It was distance. Daniel used to rush home after work. I'd hear his car pull into the driveway, and before I could even reach the door, he'd be inside, kissing me on the cheek, asking what was for dinner, telling me about his day. But somewhere in our 4th year of marriage, that changed. He started coming home later. At first, it was once or twice a week. I had to meet a client, he'd say. Or there was a networking dinner. Perfectly reasonable explanations for a man building his career. But soon the late nights became more frequent. 3 nights a week. 4, sometimes 5. I told myself he was just working hard for us. That his success was our success. That the long hours were a sign of his ambition, not a red flag. But the truth? I felt it in my gut. Something was off. The second crack came with his phone. In the beginning, Daniel would leave his phone lying around carelessly. On the kitchen counter, on the nightstand, on the couch. He didn't care if I picked it up. Didn't care if I scrolled through to find a song or check the time. But then, one night, I reached for his phone to set an alarm and he snatched it out of my hand. "I'll do it," he said quickly, almost too quickly. His voice was sharper than usual, his eyes avoiding mine. It was such a small moment, but it burned into my memory. Because after that, his phone became his shadow. He kept it in his pocket, face down on the table, or locked in his briefcase. And whenever it buzzed, he was quick, too quick to grab it. I tried not to be suspicious. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, wasn't this the same man who once gave me his email password without hesitation? The same man who swore on our wedding day to love and protect me? But deep down, my instincts whispered, he's hiding something. The third crack was more personal. Our intimacy changed. Daniel used to look at me like I was the only woman in the world. He used to reach for my hand in the middle of the night, kiss me on the forehead before leaving for work, pull me close on the couch when we watched TV. But slowly, that affection faded. He stopped holding my hand, stopped kissing me goodnight, stopped noticing when I dressed up or wore makeup. And when we did make love, it felt different, mechanical, distracted. Like his body was there, but his mind was somewhere else. That was when the loneliness really set in. Because let me tell you, there's nothing lonelier than lying next to someone who's supposed to love you and feeling like you're a million miles apart. I tried to talk to him. One night, as we sat at the dinner table, I asked gently, "Daniel, is everything okay? You've been so distant lately." He didn't even look up from his plate. "I'm just stressed from work." "Stop overthinking." His tone was dismissive, almost annoyed, as if my concern was a burden. I wanted to push, but I didn't, because part of me was afraid of the answer. That's the thing about cracks in a marriage. They don't start with explosions. They start with whispers, with small lies, with unanswered questions and ignored instincts. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was being dramatic, that all couples go through rough patches. But late at night, lying in bed alone while he was working late, I couldn't silence that voice in my head. "He's changing. You're losing him. Something isn't right." The fourth crack came in the form of lipstick. It was faint, barely noticeable, a smudge on the collar of his white dress shirt. I found it while doing laundry. At first, I thought it was my own lipstick from when I kissed him goodbye in the morning. But then I remembered I hadn't worn lipstick that day. When I showed it to him, he laughed. Actually laughed. "Are you serious? You think I'm cheating on you because of a stain? It's probably from when I hugged a client's wife at a party. Don't be ridiculous." His confidence was disarming. He looked me straight in the eye, so calm, so convincing that I felt embarrassed for even asking. I apologized. Can you believe that? I apologized for doubting him. But that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized something. The Daniel who once made me feel safe was now making me feel crazy. The final crack, the one I couldn't ignore, was the perfume. It clung to him one night when he came home late. Sweet, floral, and definitely not mine. When I asked, his answer was quick. The one I couldn't ignore was the perfume. It clung to him one night when he came home late. Sweet, floral, and definitely not mine. When I asked, his answer was quick, almost rehearsed. I was giving a female client a ride. She wore too much perfume. That's all. Again, I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to believe him, because believing the lie was easier than facing the truth. But deep inside, I knew. The man I married, the man I trusted with everything, was no longer mine. That was the beginning of the end. The cracks were no longer invisible. They were growing, spreading through our marriage like fractures in glass, threatening to shatter everything. And while I didn't have proof yet, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth revealed itself. I didn't know it then, but those cracks, the distance, the phone, the lipstick, the perfume, would soon rip my world apart. And when they did, I wouldn't just break. I would fight back. I remember one conversation vividly. It was after our son was born. I was bone-tired, my hair a mess, my body still healing. Michael looked at me and said, "You don't have to worry about anything anymore. I'll take care of us." At that moment, it felt comforting. I thought, this is love. This is security. But hidden in those words was the seed of something dangerous. Dependence. I was bone-tired, my hair a mess, my body still healing. Michael looked at me and said, "You don't have to worry about anything anymore. I'll take care of us." At that moment, it felt comforting. I thought, this is love. This is security. But hidden in those words was the seed of something dangerous. Dependence. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought we were a team, that taking care of us meant sharing burdens. What it slowly turned into was me carrying the invisible weight at home while he carried the visible weight outside. And society praised him for it. "He works so hard for his family," our neighbors would say. "You're lucky," my mother told me once. "A husband who provides is a blessing." Lucky. Was I? Yes, Michael paid the bills, but I paid with pieces of myself. I gave up the independence I once held so proudly. My friends would talk about work promotions, about trips abroad, about buying their first homes on their own. I would sit silently, nodding, holding my baby on my lap, pretending I didn't feel left behind. But here's the irony. I didn't resent it then. Not yet. I loved my family so much that I convinced myself this was the right path. I told myself that marriage was about sacrifice, about compromise. And if my part of the compromise was losing pieces of me, then so be it. It's almost painful now to look back and see how blind I was. Because while I was busy sacrificing myself for him, he wasn't sacrificing much for me at all. I wish I could tell you that I balanced it all gracefully, that I found joy in homemaking, or that motherhood filled every empty corner of my heart. But that wouldn't be honest. Motherhood is beautiful, yes, but it's also isolating. There were days when the only adult voice I heard was Michael's, and even then, sometimes he barely looked up from his phone or his plate when he came home. I craved conversation, stimulation, some reminder that I was more than just a caregiver. I would ask him, "How was your day?" Hoping for a real answer, hoping he'd share his world with me. He'd shrug. "Busy." Same old then, he'd change the subject, usually toward what was for dinner or whether I'd paid the electric bill. I began to notice how invisible I felt. Not unloved exactly, but unseen. And still, I stayed loyal. I defended him when friends whispered about his long hours. "He's just ambitious," I said. I told myself the late nights at the office were proof of his dedication. I tucked the kids into bed alone, smiled at the school events where I was the only parent present, and lied to myself that this was normal, that this was marriage. But deep inside, a quiet unease grew. It started small, like when I'd notice how he lingered a little too long on his phone, or how he avoided eye contact when I asked about his schedule. But I brushed it away. That's what a good wife does, right? She trusts. She sacrifices. She waits. I sacrificed my time, my body, my dreams. I bent myself into shapes that would fit into the mold of the perfect wife and mother. But what I didn't know back then was this. When you sacrifice too much of yourself for someone else, you don't always get loyalty in return. Sometimes you just teach them that your love has no limits, and they start to take it for granted. Looking back, I realized that the seeds of betrayal weren't planted the day he cheated. They were planted in those years of silent sacrifices, when I slowly handed him all the power, thinking love was enough to protect me. Every marriage has moments where the fantasy begins to fade. At first, it's subtle. So subtle that you convince yourself it's nothing. Just stress, just a phase, just life happening. But those tiny cracks, they grow quietly until the foundation begins to wobble. For me, the first crack came in the form of his work schedule. Daniel used to come home by 6, sometimes earlier if a meeting ended ahead of time. We'd have dinner together, laugh over our days, and then sit with the kids until bedtime. But then one day, he started coming home later. An hour later, 2, sometimes 3. Client meetings, he said. Networking dinners. I tried to shrug it off. Every ambitious man has long hours, right? But the worry started whispering. Why now? Why so often? The second crack was the phone. Daniel had always been relaxed about it. I could pick it up, scroll through for a recipe, answer texts from friends if he was busy. But slowly he became protective. Face down on the table, buzzing alerts silenced, quick glances to make sure I wasn't looking. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to believe in the man I married. But every time he grabbed the phone too quickly or walked away with it in hand, a little seed of doubt grew in me. The third crack was intimacy. Daniel used to hold me like I was the only woman in the world. He would kiss me on the forehead, squeeze my hand, whisper how much he loved me. But then those gestures became mechanical, distracted, less frequent. I asked myself, is this normal? Or am I imagining it? I told myself I was tired, hormonal, maybe just stressed from the house and the kids. But something deep inside kept whispering, no, something is wrong. The fourth crack came from small lies. The first time I noticed was lipstick on his collar. I confronted him gently, trying to be rational. Daniel, whose lipstick is this? He laughed. You're imagining things. It's probably from a hug with a client's wife. Don't be ridiculous, and I believed him. I wanted to. I loved him, and love made me blind to the truth. But the feeling lingered, a small knot of unease I couldn't shake. The final crack came in a scent I couldn't ignore. Perfume. Not mine. Not subtle. Floral, sweet, and unmistakable. I asked him. He smiled, reassured me, gave me a story about a female client. Again, I believed him. But my heart didn't. My instincts screamed, you're being lied to. You're being betrayed. Those cracks, long hours, hidden phone, mechanical touch, lies, scent, were small. Individually, almost ignorable. Together, they formed a warning, a pattern I couldn't dismiss. I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to shatter. And when it did, I would realize that ignoring the cracks had only made the coming storm more powerful, and my eventual revenge sharper. I always believed that intuition is a woman's strongest ally. That quiet, persistent voice in your mind that tells you something isn't right. Listen to it, I would later learn. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of ordinary day I almost didn't remember. I had spent the afternoon cleaning, folding laundry, and organizing our small home office. Daniel was supposed to be home by 6, but of course he was late again. By 7, my unease had grown unbearable. I found myself wandering into the home office, a place he claimed held important client files. Normally, I didn't go in there, out of respect, or maybe out of learned caution. But something inside me demanded it. That's when I saw it. His phone, left carelessly on the desk, something he never did anymore. The screen glowed with unread messages. I told myself to stop, to walk away, to ignore it. But curiosity and fear pushed me closer. I unlocked it. And there it was. Messages that made my blood run cold. Texts filled with flirtation, innuendo, and a language I had never expected to read from the man I trusted. A smiley face, a kiss emoji, the words, I can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you. I sat there frozen. The room felt smaller, suffocating. The betrayal I had suspected but denied with all my heart was staring me directly in the face. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw the phone across the room. But I didn't. Instead, I read further, each message tearing pieces of my heart apart. Days, weeks, months of evidence. He wasn't just distant. He wasn't just lying. He had been seeing someone else, someone who wasn't me, behind my back for a long time. I remember the exact thought that went through my mind. All these years, I gave him everything, and this is how he repays me. The next hours were a blur. I confronted him when he finally walked through the door. I kept my voice calm, but inside I was trembling with rage and heartbreak. "Daniel," I said, holding the phone. "Who is this?" He froze, then tried to laugh it off. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know what you're talking about." But I could see it in his eyes. The guilt, the panic, the sudden awareness that his carefully constructed lies were crumbling. I didn't need more proof. I had the proof in my hands, I won't lie. That night, I wanted revenge. Not just the kind you see in movies, the dramatic confrontations. I wanted something deeper, something that would hurt in the way he had hurt me. But I knew I had to wait. I couldn't act on impulse. Not yet. Because revenge, I had learned, or would soon learn, is far more satisfying when it's measured, precise, and unstoppable. That night, I went to bed pretending to sleep. Daniel left the room at midnight, probably thinking he had escaped the confrontation. But I was awake, wide-eyed, my mind racing with plans. Plans not just to expose him, but to reclaim my life, my dignity, and the power he had quietly taken from me over the years. I knew then that my story was no longer about a perfect marriage. It was about survival, about justice, about making sure that betrayal never had the final word. And from that night on, I stopped being the woman who quietly sacrificed everything. I became the woman who would take it all back. After the discovery, I learned a truth that would define the next chapter of my life. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't about screaming, crying, or causing a scene. The most devastating revenge is quiet, controlled, and precise. So I smiled. I smiled at Daniel as if nothing had happened. I laughed at his jokes. I cooked our dinners. I folded laundry. I was the perfect wife, the one he had always taken for granted. But behind that smile, I was planning. Every time he bragged about work, I listened. Every time he complained about minor inconveniences, I nodded. Every time he tried to charm me, I smiled politely, all the while knowing the smile wasn't for him. It was for me. The first step was information. Knowledge is power, and I was determined to reclaim it. I began keeping track of everything. Finances, schedules, credit cards, emails. I didn't have access to everything at first, but I watched, I observed, and I remembered. Small details mattered. Which days he was out late, which clients he was meeting, and which messages he claimed were work-related. I documented everything discreetly. Receipts, emails, and small bits of evidence that, when combined, would be undeniable. I had no intention of rushing into confrontation. That's a mistake many women make when they're angry. Rage is a poor advisor. Patience is lethal. Next, I began rebuilding myself. While he believed I was just the housewife, I quietly researched lawyers, financial advisors, and property laws. I read articles on divorce settlements, custody laws, and protecting assets. I reminded myself of the independence I had given up, the career I had abandoned, the dreams I had shelved. And I planned how to get it all back. It wasn't about money at first. It wasn't even about humiliation. It was about proving to myself that I could stand without him, that I could be whole again, and that he could no longer control me through the sacrifices I had made. The hardest part, I realized, was the emotional restraint. Daniel would casually mention the affair, assuming I didn't know, or he would drop subtle hints as if taunting me. Every time I smiled, nodded, and let him think he had the upper hand. Inside, I was boiling. But outside, I was calm, collected, untouchable. It was difficult. God, it was difficult. Some nights, I cried silently, clutching the phone that had betrayed him, the screen glowing with messages that had changed my life. But I never let him see that. I also began small, indirect tests, seeing if he remembered certain details, watching for inconsistencies in his stories, tracking his patterns. Every little lie he told, every small secret he thought he had hidden, added another piece to the puzzle. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was rebuilding my strength, my intellect, my confidence. Because here's the thing. Revenge without preparation is impotent. And I refused to let my anger make me weak. By the end of that year, I had transformed. Outwardly, I was the same woman he had married, smiling, supportive, attentive. Inwardly, I was a strategist. I knew every weakness, every blind spot. I had rebuilt my independence in secret, quietly securing the tools I would need to reclaim my life. And I waited. Because timing is everything. And when the time came, Daniel wouldn't just be shocked. He wouldn't just be hurt. He would be powerless. And for the first time in years, I felt completely alive. By the time Daniel thought he had won, I was already 2 steps ahead. I had spent months observing, documenting, and preparing. I knew the exact days he would be late, the nights he would meet clients, the moments he would let his guard down. And I had all the evidence I needed. Texts, receipts, emails, even photographs that confirmed what I already suspected. But the most important tool wasn't proof. It was patience. I started with finances. While Daniel thought he controlled every dollar, I quietly opened accounts in my own name. I transferred small amounts from joint expenses without raising suspicion. I researched investments, contacted lawyers, and secured my own credit. By the time I was ready to confront him, I wouldn't be dependent on him financially. That was the first victory, regaining my independence. Next, I set boundaries. Outwardly, I maintained the perfect wife facade. I smiled, laughed, and joked like nothing was wrong. But I started keeping secrets. My plans, my discoveries, my strategy. I learned when to speak and when to remain silent. I kept conversations neutral and carefully avoided emotional reactions. This was my armor. I also began gathering support. I reached out to a trusted friend, someone outside of Daniel's world, someone who could help me validate my discoveries and give me objective advice. I consulted professionals, discreetly, and learned how to use the law to my advantage. I wanted every move to be deliberate, every action calculated. Revenge, I realized, isn't about revenge alone. It's about reclaiming control. And control, my friends, is irresistible when wielded quietly. Then came the subtle psychological work. I let Daniel believe he still had power over me. I laughed at his jokes, agreed with his opinions, and smiled when he bragged. But every time he underestimated me, every time he believed I was blind or naive, I grew stronger inside. I observed his habits, the way he left his phone unattended, the way he was careless with details around the house, the way he underestimated my memory. Every flaw became a tool, every oversight a piece of leverage. The turning point was realizing something vital. Revenge doesn't need to humiliate him in public to succeed. It's far more effective when it's quiet, private, and unavoidable. So I began plotting, step by step, a confrontation with undeniable proof at the exact right moment. Secure legal and financial independence so he couldn't manipulate me. Emotional resilience to remain calm and in control during the fallout. I was no longer the woman who had sacrificed everything blindly. I was the woman who had watched, waited, and mastered the art of strategy. By the time I acted, I was untouchable. He still thought I was naive. He still thought I trusted him blindly. He still thought his affair was a secret. And all the while, I held every card. When the day finally came, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hysterical. I wasn't desperate. I was calm, precise, and ready, because I had learned the most important lesson of all. You cannot control someone else's choices, but you can control your response. And that control, when exercised wisely, is the ultimate revenge. The day had finally arrived. Daniel still believed he was untouchable. He had no idea how much I knew, how long I had been preparing, or how carefully I had planned my moves. And that, my friends, was my advantage. I didn't storm into the house screaming. I didn't cry or beg. I smiled. Calmly, almost casually. The kind of smile that says, I know everything, and I am completely unshaken. First, I confronted him with evidence. I laid out the phone messages, emails, and receipts on the dining table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I let him see it, read it, and absorb it. The color drained from his face as he realized I had everything. Every secret he thought he had hidden. "Daniel," I said, softly but firmly, "I trusted you with my life." "And this is how you repay me?" He stammered, tried to explain, tried to blame, tried to manipulate. But I had rehearsed my response for months. I didn't fall for it. I didn't engage with his excuses. I simply looked at him, cold and unwavering. Next, I asserted my independence. I handed him a copy of the documents I had prepared: separate bank accounts, legal advice, and a plan for custody and asset division if necessary. I told him calmly, "I'm no longer dependent on you. And from now on, I make my own decisions." This wasn't just about punishment. It was about reclaiming my power. The independence I had sacrificed for years, piece by piece. And he realized in that moment that he had lost control over me completely. The final stroke was emotional mastery. I didn't seek revenge in front of friends or family. I didn't want public humiliation. The real victory was private, internal, and permanent. Daniel felt the weight of his choices. He saw that I was no longer the woman he could manipulate or hurt. I was free, and he had nothing left to hold over me. For years, I had felt powerless. For years, I had sacrificed my dreams and independence for him. But in that moment, the tables had turned. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist, a survivor, a woman who refused to be broken. After the confrontation, I began rebuilding my life. I returned to work part-time at first, rediscovering the skills I had set aside. I connected with friends I had lost touch with, traveled to places I had dreamed of visiting, and slowly, carefully, built a life that belonged to me. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. I learned that my intuition was my strongest guide, that my independence was priceless, and that my strength could overcome even the deepest betrayal. The lesson I want everyone to take from my story is this: never lose yourself for someone else. Never sacrifice your independence in the name of love. And always, always trust your instincts. Betrayal is painful. It can leave scars that last a lifetime. But it can also teach you the most valuable lesson of all: that your worth does not depend on anyone else and your power lies within you. Daniel's affair broke my trust, but it also awakened my strength. And in the end, that is the revenge that lasts forever. It's been years since that betrayal. Daniel is no longer a part of my life, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted freedom. The pain he caused me was real, and the scars remain. But I have learned to carry them not as burdens, but as reminders of my strength. I rebuilt my life from the ground up. I returned to work full-time, started a small business I had once dreamed of, and reconnected with the friends I had drifted away from. I traveled, laughed, and discovered joys I had long forgotten in the haze of sacrifice and loyalty. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. The woman I am today is not the woman who once gave up everything for love. I am wiser, stronger, independent, and yes, I am happy. Not because someone else saved me, but because I saved myself. The betrayal taught me that love should never cost you your voice, your dreams, or your self-respect. That lesson is worth more than any heartbreak, any lost night of sleep, any tear shed in silence. To anyone watching, listening, or reading this story, if you've ever been betrayed, abandoned, or taken for granted, remember this: your worth is not defined by anyone else. Trust your instincts. They are more powerful than you know. Patience, planning, and self-respect are your greatest allies. And above all, reclaiming your life is the most satisfying revenge. I don't tell this story to dwell on pain or to shame anyone. I tell it to show that even in the darkest moments, we have the power to rise. We can turn heartbreak into strength, betrayal into clarity, and loss into liberation. Looking back, I realized that the cheating husband and the empty house were not the end of my story. They were the beginning of the life I was meant to live. One where I am unapologetically myself, where my independence is my strength, and where my happiness is mine alone. And that, in the end, is the real victory.